Hello and welcome back to day 2 of BSO 2022. This is an early start. I see we've got people coming in as we speak, which is really, really good. And so this session is about it's called a research showcase. And the intention was within the sort of broader context of BSO and our special focus Global South, to use the opportunity to showcase some work we've been doing as part of joint Indo-UK funded projects. And these projects came about as part of the Newton Papa Fund, jointly between EPSRC, ESRC, and the Department of Science and Technology in India. And the broad theme of the call that we all responded to and was successful in obtaining funding for was called Energy Demand Reduction in the Built Environment. And the call was launched sometime in, I think, late 2016, early 2017, and projects began late 2017. And the sort of thematic areas that the call asked us to investigate were on peak demand reduction through looking at things like building envelopes, low energy heating and cooling, social practices, city and community level energy efficient technologies, looking at urban planning, community design and management for energy, and then integration of ICT and renewables at building, community and city level interactions. So these were really asking us to look at the sort of complex socio-technical aspects of reducing demand, specifically within the context of buildings in India. So that was a sort of broad remit within which we were funded. There were 4 projects that were funded. And each of these projects is going to present their work today. The first is CEDRI, which is being led on the UK side by David Jenkins, who will go first. The second is iNUMBER, led by Paul Ruyssevelt at UCL. He'll go next. The third was RESIDE, which briefly we heard about yesterday. And in fact, even for iNUMBER, we heard a little bit at Rajan Raval's keynote yesterday. But Rajat also talked about some of the results from his RESIDE project in one of the parallel sessions. And finally, ZED-i, which is a project I was leading along with colleagues at IIT Roorkee. And I'm hoping Rajasekar is not here yet, but I'm hoping he's going to turn up to speak on his half. Otherwise, I do have slides that can probably cover more than the allocated 10 minutes. And the plan is for each of us to present for about 10 minutes. We have a good amount of time because we've actually set some time out, roughly 25 minutes for audience Q&A. So we're absolutely happy to take this into a more lively and engaged situation. But I think we should be reasonably flexible with the presentation time. If people want to carry on for a minute or two, no big deal. The key is to kind of just get the high-level messages out from each of these 4 projects. So we're not delving necessarily into great details on methods or maybe the science and engineering or other aspects of it. It's just a kind of hopefully the large high-level outcomes from each of these projects. So with that, I'd like to invite Professor David Jenkins from Heriot-Watt to make his presentation for the CEDRI project.
Thanks very much, Sukumar, and good morning, everyone. So I'm Dave Jenkins from Heriot-Watt University, led the CEDRI project, so that's Community Energy Demand Reduction in India. Like the other Newton Baba projects that you're going to hear about, this was funded through EPSRC and the Indian Department of Science and Technology. Our plan or our intention was to look at designing energy demand reduction strategies for Indian communities, but in a way that reflects 3 different components of modelling and assessment. So the evolution of the built environment itself, understanding the baseline of those buildings, but potentially where they're going to be going. Local network constraints, so the energy systems that are actually serving those buildings, what's being asked of those local networks and how that might change in the future. And also the behavior of Indian households, particularly in relation to cooling, but some other aspects of energy use as well, and the methods that you might use to try and understand that with case study communities. So the CEDRI team was ourselves at Heriot-Watt University leading the project, alongside IIT Delhi, NIT Trichy, IIT Bombay, and also a team of industry stakeholders as well. So there's a good mix of organizations, but a good mix of disciplines and skill sets as well. So the starting point, really understanding energy demand in India from a built environment point of view. So as building modelers, sometimes we do like to think of typical buildings, average buildings, to make things easier for ourselves, particularly when we're looking at stock modeling and energy system modeling and that type of thing. Of course, in India, that's something of a challenge. So these are pictures of buildings that we were looking at through different case studies. So at the top, we have a fairly sort of recognizable apartment block. In the middle, we have a temple, which is a temple complex, which is in the middle of one of our case study communities, which I'll mention in a minute. And then at the bottom, you have something which is maybe more immediately recognizable as the kind of urban sprawl of urban India, in this case Delhi. So even asking the question of what is a typical building for this kind of project becomes slightly fatuous and not a particularly useful question, actually. And I'll take you through our approach to that in a minute. And then, of course, with India, for a project that's trying to look at future scenarios and where things are going, dealing with the scale of change that's projected in across the country, but also regions of India. So first of all, India is projected to have the highest population of any country in the world, only a few years from now, but certainly that gradient of change, that steep growth of population is important to note. And also because it's not just an increase in number, it's that the makeup of that population, the growth of the middle class, the growth of households with disposable income who might be purchasing certain technologies that we then need to reflect within our building modeling. These are all things that we have to think about. It's the kind of the messy context which as building modelers we maybe would like to avoid, but we have to somehow try to get our heads around to do good future scenario modeling. Of course, climate change, that's as important to India as anywhere. Of course, the difference with India, particularly if we're looking at cooling, is that there's already very high temperatures being experienced in some of the communities we're looking at, and climate change is exacerbating that problem, but it's not necessarily driving the growth of cooling. As I'll touch on later, that growth of cooling is maybe coming from more kind of socioeconomic factors as much as climate change. And then just the overall energy demand in India, some of the projections are quite eye-watering for the next 10, 20, 30 years for what's going to happen with energy demand in India and the role of the built environment with that. And then, of course, how the energy supply infrastructure might deal with meeting that demand is quite a challenge. So these are all contextual things that we're trying to understand. We can't answer all these questions with a fairly sort of limited scope of a research project, but these are all contextual things that we do have to try to reflect in our modeling. And I mentioned in the presentation yesterday that I gave, which is a bit more technical, I guess, the different strands of the work and the different processes that we went through. So we had these three areas: network modeling, demand modeling, and energy behavior assessment that we carried out within CEDRI. Within the network modeling, we're looking at network characteristics, how the grid might evolve in the future to deal with new demand profiles, and the resilience of that network to future change. How much upgrading of that network, how much new infrastructure is required just to deal with the expected changes of demand, a lot of which will be driven or certainly affected by the growth of cooling in the residential sector, which is what we were particularly majoring on. Demand modeling, we looked at different techniques to, first of all, synthesize the demand, and this is in the BSO paper that we presented, so I'm not going to go into this in a huge amount of detail, but essentially measuring lots of energy demand data, electricity demand data for our case study communities, but then try to synthesize the profiles that we see, synthesize the characteristics so that we can perform better aggregation techniques so that we can link individual building assessments with network level or local network level energy assessments. So that's a key part of what we were doing in the project. And also using your dare I say, a bog standard dynamic simulation to try to understand the impact of various demand reduction techniques, particularly around cooling, particularly around the sort of very complex interaction between ventilation and cooling systems and the choices people make to achieve some level of thermal comfort in their dwellings. And then the energy behavior side, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because I think it's important for us as building modelers to try to accommodate some of this, even if it's outside our immediate area of expertise. So we used sort of household surveys, face-to-face interviews, workshops, co-production workshops, to try to document the current energy behavior in some of the communities we were looking at, but also the likely response to transition and change. So we didn't want to be this project that comes along with some top-down solutions to say, well, this is how you reduce your demand, or this is how you manage your demand in the future. There you go. There's a set of solutions for you to go away with. We want to try to understand the behaviors, why people use energy in the way they do, and try to get the individuals themselves, the householders themselves, involved with that process of designing, in particular, a kind of local cooling strategy. So our main case study was in Araval, in Tamil Nadu, in the southeast of India. Absolutely not chosen due to its typical nature. This was a slight concern, I think, from the Indian funders, because they want findings that reflect the whole of India, quite understandably. But our approach was always, you can choose any community in India, and describing it as typical or average would be somewhat tenuous. So we're not really looking to pull out a case study of hundreds or even thousands of homes and then saying we can extrapolate these answers to the rest of India. We're looking to test out the quantitative and qualitative methods that we're developing with a well-known case study. So this was a case study we've worked with before. And then we're able to potentially run those methods for other communities as well. So we're looking to replicate the method, but not necessarily replicate the results. And in terms of the kind of questions we might ask these methods that we're developing, so let's take a fairly specific one just to take you through some of the processes we went through. So we might be asking, what's the difference between current and future demand experienced by local networks serving a community? So we're trying to understand that evolution of demand and what that means for the local energy infrastructure. And we're taking a fairly sort of building modeling centric role in that. So that's kind of the starting point of a lot of this. So we have our measured building energy demand data. We have our building physical data. We have a good understanding of the householders themselves through the responses and the engagement that we've conducted. So our approach, and this is a very simplified approach of what we were doing, was to measure and then synthesize the demand for a certain number of buildings that we might need. That allows us to create this bridge between individual building assessments and something that can actually speak to a network level, a local network level model. So this is a scaling jump that lots of projects have come across, this idea of trying to use detailed building simulation or detailed building data analysis, but then extrapolate that to a level that you can actually talk to the network. So we're talking about hundreds of buildings if you're talking to a kind of feeder substation level. So we're able to do that through techniques that are described in the paper. We can then potentially future morph those synthesized building demand profiles by accounting for climate change, or because we correlated the effect of weather and demand. So we can morph some of these demand profiles for a future climate, but also adjust those for the effect or the modeled effect of demand reduction measures by running dynamic simulation through some of our case study buildings and looking at what happens if we play about with thermal mass and insulation and different materials to manage the temperature in those buildings a little bit in a more smart way. But all of these can then be filtered through our understanding of the householders themselves. So, as I say, we don't want to just dump these solutions on communities when they've told us that those solutions just do not work for them. That wouldn't be possible for various reasons. And this is the kind of key point, maybe I wouldn't say the USP, but one of the kind of key novelties, I guess, of CEDRI is this attempt to try to boil down qualitative understanding of behavior and put that into our assessment for buildings and local networks. As building modelers, we like to be able to, when we do when we think we're accounting for behavior, what we often doing is just running quantitative profiles of things changing, things switching on and off. That's not really behavior. Behavior is often quite a sort of messy description of qualitative and quantitative aspects of things that people are doing, but also why they're doing those things. And if you're doing future scenario modeling, somehow as a building modeler, you need to boil down those quite descriptive assessments of what people are doing and why they're doing them, and think, well, how can this mean anything to my building model? And that jump is something that we I won't say struggled with, but was a particular challenge. But if we do all these things, we can then potentially produce some kind of future network model, which gives us some comparison with that baseline, and we can start to think about what does the network need to do to adjust to this kind of evolving demand picture. Just on the sort of social science part of the project, so we ran 20 in-depth interviews, as I say, to try to understand the cooling preferences and just engage with those householders more generally. With those in-depth face-to-face interviews, we were able to design a questionnaire which was sent to a wider sample within the community, and identify appliances that are used, particularly cooling appliances, how they're using them, why they're using them, when they're using them. And because we've got measured energy data, we can actually see the effect of those responses in the data itself, and that tells us something. When we try to synthesize those demand profiles, we have a stronger understanding of causation. And we also ran 2 co-production workshops, so one around cooling flexibility options, so developing a local cooling policy for that community that makes sense to that community, but is also informed by the modeling and analysis work that we did. So that was a really interesting exercise, which we've published on. And a completely separate exercise with practitioners within the energy network industry in India, so that they can put across what they think the challenges are to their local energy networks, and in effect judge some of the things that we're coming up with in terms of whether they feel they'll be able to accommodate these changes or not. And the drivers of householder behaviour was I mean, it was a project in itself, really. And so this really diverse range of values were observed that impact cooling behaviour: biospheric, altruistic, economic, cultural factors, all at play, that are resulting in a certain type of approach to cooling in these communities, or this particular community. And for a building modeler, that makes identifying triggers for cooling more complex. I mean, we want some set of numbers in our model that identifies when a cooling system comes on, or when a cooling system is used in a certain way. And so that's really difficult when it's not just about temperature thresholds, it's also about a perception of temperature. So in our particular community in Auroville, there was a tradition of not having cooling. Cooling was seen as a fundamentally bad, unsustainable thing. But then with climate change kicking in, and also their GPs telling them, look, there's health implications of being too warm, this kind of sort of drip of information over time has changed the culture towards cooling, where cooling is potentially being seen as a default must-have technology just to stay healthy. Yes, there's carbon and energy implications, but there's other factors at play that are changing people's behavior towards cooling. So, I mean, ultimately, how you put that into an IS or Energy Plus model is not a straightforward thing, but we have to be aware of, when we're doing future scenario modeling, we have to be aware of these kind of things going on, because it affects the use of a cooling system, but also the purchasing of that system. And for Auroville, some of these findings were maybe case study specific, but it was mentioned, I think, in one of the keynotes yesterday, that the penetration of air conditioning in Indian homes is very low, something like 12%. So what we're seeing across India, not just this case study, is that we're going to be going from a very low penetration of cooling to potentially a much higher penetration of cooling in Indian homes. And some of that will be cultural changes, some of that will be socioeconomic, just people have more access and more affordability for these technologies. But this is something that's likely to be repeated for different reasons in other Indian communities. So just to finish off, as I think a couple of minutes over, which SUKUMAR said was okay, so that's fine. So CEDRI was trying to combine these qualitative and quantitative techniques for community level energy analysis, and that worked well for the communities that we had good understanding of and good contact with. But of course, the flip side of that is, well, how could you repeat this analysis for less data-rich areas? There is lots of data around India, but it is slightly sporadic. It depends on a certain area. You'll find one area that is quite data rich, other areas where the building stock or perhaps a high penetration of informal settlements means that you know less about those buildings, and that's a challenge. In developing countries, clearly defining future scenarios is crucial because of the rate of change. I mean, you finish a building modelling exercise and you question whether your building model is now out of date. So you need to accommodate these external factors that are going on. And unfortunately, or to make matters more difficult, that does mean understanding the occupants and what they're doing, which, as I keep saying, is quite a difficult thing to harness into a sort of traditional building modelling exercise. And we might question whether building modelers do this. I know we had a discussion yesterday about whether building modelers are literate. There's maybe a subsection there where we discuss whether building modelers understand people or have an interest in understanding people. That's perhaps a separate discussion. Case study communities are not directly generalizable for countries the size of India, so we need to use those case studies appropriately, and potentially we need to do more work on bridging that scalability between a case study analysis and something that's countrywide. And then just to recognize that India obviously needs to manage what is surely an inevitable rise in cooling demand for the reasons I've said. So how can you, with such varied communities across a country like India at a vast scale, how can you engage those communities in that process so that you're actually putting forward solutions across different communities in India that are actually informed by the people who are actually using that energy? And I shall wrap up there. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, David, for taking me up on the offer of extra minutes. To the audience who's here, please feel free to use the Q&A channel at any point, pose questions as the thoughts come into your heads. I know we've set time aside for Q&A right at the end, but we're not sort of beholden to a particular format. If there's any burning questions, we can happily take them on. I can see Rajasekar has joined us as well. Welcome, Rajasekar. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, David, for a very, very sort of a wonderful summary of CEDRI. I think there were lots of sort of thought-provoking issues that you brought up, and I think we can hopefully pick them up as we go. I think I'd like to keep things rolling and invite Paul to talk about iNUMBER straight away, and then to the audience, please do feel free to post Q&As, and we can be a bit more freewheeling with the session. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Sukumar. And I think I'm going to give a sort of complementary presentation to the presentation that David has given. Bear with me just 1 second. I want to get the screen with people on it back onto my screen, which seems to have disappeared. No, can't do that. Okay, press on. So iNUMBER is a project, as the name suggests, which is developing urban building energy models to understand energy and environmental performance in the built environment. And it's a joint project between UCL and CEPT University and Ahmedabad, working with Bentley Systems and a number of other private sector partners who've helped us in the project. It was through the same timescales that Sukumar mentioned earlier. When we talk about urban energy modeling, in our understanding at least, we're looking at the computational modeling and simulation of large groups of buildings. And this project in particular was aimed at providing tools for urban local bodies, what we call local authorities here, to help them understand the performance of the existing building stock and to help them think about how they might undertake retrofits where appropriate, look at regeneration projects, and also look at how new buildings might be integrated into the existing urban fabric. The project focuses on Ahmedabad in Gujarat state in India, and it brings together both the energy use and performance of the building stock with the municipal services, such as the provision of pumped water surfaces. When we talk about urban energy modelling, there's often this debate about top-down and bottom-up, and a lot of the work that's done on understanding the energy performance of the building stock is top-down. It's statistical. It tends to be a little bit of a black box. It divides up the energy use at national level into segments of the stock, be it domestic or non-domestic. But we also have a sort of hybrid form of modelling where we have representative archetypes of individual buildings, different types of homes, different types of non-domestic buildings, which we model and then scale up to represent the stock. And that technique is useful when it comes to understanding possible generic solutions or generic approaches to improving segments of the stock. But it doesn't help if you want to actually look at things spatially and look at the interrelationship between buildings and understand the buildings in context. And for that, we need really a bottom-up approach that takes a much more detailed representation of the buildings and systems that operate in an urban environment. And these models have been in development for some time. UCL, we've been developing the three-dimensional digital models of the entire building stock for close to a decade now. And if you look at where these models are, you'll typically find that they're in the Northern Hemisphere. And they tend to benefit from the fact that in many cases there are good data sources, and they also represent an approach to modeling which relates to particular climates. There's virtually none in the global south. These different data services, and the sort of climatic challenges are somewhat different. And we felt within the project, the iNUMBER project, that we needed to address this, that we needed to start to think about how these urban scale models could be developed for locations in the global south. And in order to do that, we looked at this model of top down and bottom up and decided that what was critical was to have a middle out. We needed to understand how we can bring these things together in a modeling system. To take account of the building stock in the city, to look at the municipal energy services, and also to understand in a little bit more detail the actual residential energy use. So the project involved three primary work packages: modeling the building stock and producing a digital representation of it. Work package 2, which brought in the municipal services, in particular water supply and pumped water supply, which is a very important energy use in Indian urban situations. And work package 3, which actually involved monitoring of performance of individual residences in areas in Ahmedabad. For non-residential buildings, we were able to draw on prior work that had been taking place at CEPT University from projects like Seabird. To undertake the analysis of the urban fabric and to understand the makeup of the urban context, we employed some techniques of photogrammetry to gather large area photographs from different angles, so that you can produce a sort of very detailed composite visual image of the urban fabric. The illustration at the bottom shows how you can do this also with LiDAR And that's the way typically we do it in the UK when we're building our models, because we're very fortunate that the Environment Agency in the UK undertakes a fixed-wing LiDAR survey of the whole country. That doesn't exist in India, so we've had to use a drone flight system where we have gone out to individual areas of the city and flown drones backwards and forwards, capturing this photogrammetry information. Now, that's a reasonably time-consuming exercise, but worthwhile given that it captures such a rich level of detail. But of course, photographs are interesting to look at, but they're not much use when it comes to producing a digital model. So using technology provided by Bentley Systems, we're able to translate these photographs into a three-dimensional digital mesh that provides us with detailed information about the shape and size of the buildings, which can then be overlaid onto the building footprints from other sources. But one of the key challenges here in an urban environment such as Ahmedabad, where we have a lot of trees and other material around the buildings, which can in some cases confuse the picture. You don't necessarily understand where the buildings end and the trees start. You have to try to disentangle these in order to get a much cleaner three-dimensional representation of the building. And a large portion of the work that was undertaken in iNUMBER was to develop methods in order to do this using machine learning and artificial intelligence. And those have actually been proved very successful, and they also form a legacy that can be used in other contexts now. To build the full model, you don't just need the digital representation of the shape and size of the building. You need to also to bring into that the description of the construction materials, the amount of glazing, and quite obviously also the way that the buildings are occupied and operated. Sometimes you can get additional data on some of these factors, but mostly you're making assumptions or using data that comes from the sorts of case studies that David has just described, and evaluating sensitivities and scenarios in order to develop meaningful results. And this is just an illustration of the workflow that goes into producing the final models here. And when you've done that, you can begin to segment the model into the different use type components as is illustrated here, and also look at the different municipal supplies of both energy and water, and how they relate to the individual buildings. And finally, you end up with a situation where you can drill down into individual buildings and understand the components of end-use energy demand as provided by the simulation modeling. That can be compared to actual meter data, and calibrations or validation exercises can be performed where that data is available for specific buildings in order to build confidence in the model. So the iNUMBER project finished a little while ago, and the model that has been produced is now being used for these types of scenario analysis in collaboration with the city of Ahmedabad. But it also produced some very useful relationships between UCL and SEPT University and other parties, such that we were able to move on and develop further projects, which I think is always a valuable aspect of any research project. And the first of those is a project called GEMDEV, which deals with grounded energy models for equitable urban development. And that takes this very significant challenge of working within informal settlements, which, as David has already pointed out, much more difficult to deal with, and we have to develop other techniques in order to understand how they operate. This project combines both the sort of digital modeling that I've just been illustrating, together with some very significant on-the-ground interactions with the people and communities that live in these settlements in Ahmedabad, and also in a collaborating environment in Lima in Peru. Another project that came out is something called UBase, which takes the data that we've been looking at and begins to start benchmarking the energy use of different building types within the urban fabric. And this is very helpful when you want to look at the performance of individual buildings and compare them to what we might expect them to do. And finally, relating to the subject of cooling, which we know will inevitably increase in India, as David's already pointed out, looking at techniques by which cooling energy can be stored in order to distribute and minimize the peak demands on the grid. There's a project called Sites, which is also spawned from the iNUMBER project. So that was a quick summary, not as detailed as David's, but I'm happy to answer questions in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. I think it just goes to show just how diverse and varied the approaches are across the projects, and also the shared similarities, especially in terms of the central challenges that each of us has explored. So there aren't any questions in the Q&A channel yet, so I think I'll defer to Rajat to present RESIDE. So Rajat's already started sharing his screen, so over to you, Rajat.
Can you see the slide mode?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, good. First, I'd like to thank Sukumar for bringing us all together as this kind of cohort of projects that got funded. So thank you, Sukumar, for the session. It's really good to see what all we've achieved actually over the last 4 or 5 years. So what I want to do is talk about RESIDE, which is one of the 4 projects. This is particularly focused on residential building energy demand in India. And this is led by Oxford Brookes University in the UK with IIIT Hyderabad, Vishal Garg, and MNIT Jaipur, Jyotirmay Mathur. Really, I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of the project. It's quite large, so it's difficult to focus into the depth, but I'm going to give you the breadth of what we've achieved. So it all started in 2017 when the call came out, and by the end of the year, there was this kind of ceremony where all of us got these awards to kickstart the project, and that was quite nice. And that's the time we all came together. Actually, the team is big as other projects. So we were different researchers on the 3 academic institutions, but also working with non-academic partners, technology providers, builders, policy makers, and incubators as well. RESIDE really is about setting up a vision to study all aspects of residential energy use in India across the different climatic zones that exist. And the reason for doing so was to provide the evidence base for informing the residential building energy code. Both the members in the team were part of the committee that set up the code, which we knew had some kind of gaps in terms of the data-driven nature that we wanted it to have. And to do so, we had a number of objectives. So we started with analyzing what data sets were there in terms of residential energy and thermal comfort, and what were the user needs and data gaps. We wanted to develop low-cost methods for monitoring and benchmarking. We established energy demand patterns. We also then looked at smart home energy management systems and undertook studies of recently built dwellings through post-occupancy evaluation methods. All the data then kind of was designed to feed into models, both at building and community level. And constantly the purpose was to provide policy support for residential energy code. So in terms of outputs and outcomes for the project, I've kind of put them into 6 categories. The first was obviously new knowledge and insights through various academic publications that came out. We also kind of developed some innovative technologies, especially low-cost sensors for monitoring concurrently electricity, indoor temperature, and relative humidity. Smart home energy management system. We developed a range of tools. We think they are quite practical, ranging from online repository on residential energy and thermal comfort studies, an online survey approach to be able to gather socio-technical data on residential energy, a dashboard on visualization and analytics of the monitoring data, and mobile apps to provide energy feedback and smart control. We also managed to get a smart home annex in the residential energy code and develop archetype models which could be used going forward to run different scenarios. We were passionate about developing data sets, not just papers and knowledge and tools. So empirical data sets have been created, which can kind of help with some of these measurements. And then obviously stakeholder engagement all the way. So I'll take you through some of what we have found. In terms of new knowledge and insights, we started off by kind of looking at what was out there. And that kind of was looking at thermal comfort studies. And we found that there was very limited, across different climatic zones, especially temperate climate. Very few studies considered occupant behavior. And the studies that considered, they were kind of giving very different results with very different ways of, data collection as well. And that kind of got published as well. We also looked at, meta study of residential energy studies. There were quite a few. But again, limited focus on occupant behavior, and the data that was available was very limited and not adequate to develop representative models. And there was lack of consistency in the way data was being gathered, reported, analyzed, interpreted. So we put forward this metadata framework to characterize studies, whether, how do you kind of look at, dwelling type and income group, what methodology they were using, how long, what was the unit of the study, and whether they were occupants, household, or dwelling. We also then started our kind of large-scale monitoring campaign with a pilot study, which was about 20 dwellings in Hyderabad. And that was very useful because that gave us an idea of not just what was coming out in terms of finding, but also our methods. And obviously, we kind of, some things were kind of unexpected. Air-conditioned homes were using a lot, about 200% more in the peak period. The indoor temperatures were all, much more tighter and had a narrower band in air-conditioned homes. The same with relative humidity as well. But interestingly, what we found was when we started to do the field studies, there were lots of issues related to technology. So initially, we had thought of using internet connectivity, but because of this, we realized it needs to be more local and Bluetooth enabled. And because they were, internet is not getting around all the time. There was also technology to person interaction, issues and challenges where, we were trying to put these loggers on main circuit board, and that's not always easy in an Indian context. And where do you locate these loggers? And then also person to person interaction. The electrician we hired for installing our loggers was, being used by householders to do additional electrical works. So how do you kind of manage those householder expectations without jeopardizing their participation? And those were kind of very practical issues that kind of emerged, from starting to do this kind of field work. We then kind of, as the data came in, we started to look at socio-technical factors that influence, residential energy use during regression models. And, we found that number of occupants, presence of air conditioning, income group size had a big effect on your residential energy demand. We also kind of looked at relationship of residential AC with indoor temperature and relative humidity. We were trying to find trigger temperatures at which, air conditioning would come on. And it really was showing in the summer and monsoon season that at about 29 to 32 degrees with a relative humidity of 36 to 39% was around when air conditioning was being turned on. Slightly lower temperatures in the monsoon season, but higher humidity. And then we compared that against what the National Building Code said. And clearly there were savings potential there. We then also looked at a large data set, just under 5,000 households, to really look at this variation in electricity use across all climatic zones, different seasons, income group, presence of air conditioning. And the variation was prevalent. And that is something that needs to be accounted for in the energy code. At the moment, it's a single energy code for the country, and it needs to account for climatic zones, seasons, income groups. And that's important for the take-up of the code. And then I presented this yesterday, but essentially we were also looking at detailed data on residential electricity use and trying to see how does that differ depending upon extent of AC ownership. So you see here 3 profiles, and you can see that 1 AC, 2 AC, and 3 or more AC homes have similar profiles, but very different in terms of their peak period and the magnitude of the peak. And in fact, homes with 3 or more air conditioning units can have double the amount of daily seasonal annual electricity use. And in the peak period, they could be using about over 6 kilowatt hours from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m., which could be dropping to 4 kilowatt hours for homes with less number of air conditioners. And as home working becomes more prevalent, as more homes start to get air conditioned in multiple ways, this is a problem which will need to be addressed to avoid brownouts and kind of blackouts. Number of papers, again, like other projects have been published. They're available on the website. And then we got some recognition. One of the papers won an award in a conference, so that was quite good for INDO-UK kind of partners. And then, there were a series of technologies that came about. I think this is particularly something we are proud of. This is a low-cost logger for monitoring electricity and indoor temperature and relative humidity. It cost about $20. It wasn't easy to kind of develop and test and calibrate, but it's much cheaper than what we use in the UK and was necessary for doing a large-scale campaign. We also developed the smart home energy management system, which has got its own kind of energy meter, window opening, closing sensor, humidity sensor, smart sockets, and occupancy sensors to help with smart management of energy use, and it's being deployed in 10 homes now. Before that, we had a test bed for the system in the lab to just test out what works and what doesn't work, and that was a very interesting exercise to do. A lot of tools came about, and they were, we started off with kind of this online repository of metadata, so you could kind of do customizable searches based on what papers had been published on residential energy and comfort. We also developed an energy survey protocol, so to kind of enable large scale data gathering, and different survey forms and other things have been kind of produced, and they're available online. Starting for building survey, household survey, cooling survey, appliance survey, to really provide that contextual information to understand, what is happening and why is it happening, alongside, obviously the monitoring data. We've also created this dashboard to really bring the data together to enable users to query the data in their own ways. We can't write all the papers, we can't create all the research questions, and there are many more out there. And from the day one of the project, we've been passionate about making things open. So, you can kind of take the data and, characterize it. You can kind of profile it and do your own selections in terms of what periods you want to see in terms of indoor temperature, electricity, relative humidity. You can start to do some queries on distribution, on, scatter plots and other things. And then also start to benchmark it. So, try and see what the indoor temperatures of those homes, which you can search by build form, income group, dwelling size, number of AC units. How does that compare with IMAC? Or with the NBC, the National Building Code maximum, minimum. We also created these mobile apps with, accompanying smart home energy management systems to provide trend analysis. And these were given to householders on their mobiles, so they could see how they were performing themselves, how they were performing against, their own neighborhood. And then some smart controls, how they could kind of schedule the geyser or the air conditioner. And then just to end, in terms of policy support, I think we were very fortunate that we managed to get our Annex C smart home energy management system insights into the code itself. We are having our fire alarms very lacking. Apologies for that. So we managed to get this Annex C in the policy document, which I think is an achievement of the project, covering different aspects of smart home energy management systems. We've been creating residential building archetypes that can be used for different scenarios for seeing what building energy demand reduction is possible for different types of dwellings. We've also created data sets, which have millions of data points. And in the next year, hopefully we can release some of that for wider consumption and usage by the academic community. And then finally, I think all the way stakeholder engagement has been absolutely essential. It's helped us in kind of refining our own methodology, keeping in mind that India is very diverse and varied, and how we need to keep everything anonymized despite our large scale data gathering exercises, and how necessary that is for kind of future policies. There is a website where most of what I've said is available. It couldn't have happened without our partners and stakeholders. So I'm very grateful for all their input. And thank you again for inviting me to speak. I'm going to stop here. I've probably run out of time massively, Sukumar.
No, I think we're surprisingly doing bang on time. I'm sorry to report, Rajat, that I completely stopped taking any notes with the other ones. I managed to write a few things down, but I think you presented so many things in such a wonderfully compact manner that I just gave up. It was absolutely fantastic to see all the work you guys have been doing as part of RESIDE. So thank you very much. Still no questions on the Q&A channel. So yeah, just a reminder to our participants, if you're interested, at any point, start popping questions on the Q&A channel. There's a little button on the Zoom, at the bottom of the Zoom window, and you should be able to post any questions or thoughts or comments, whatever you like. So now that Rajat's put us all to shame, I will attempt to pick up the pieces right at the end by sharing my screen. Hang on, let me just click play here, otherwise it doesn't. Yeah, the screen. Oh, great. My screen is not showing up. Hang on a second. I might leave and just join back, and I'll be back. All right, I'm back. Hopefully that means it actually allows me to share my screen. That's interesting, isn't it? Okay, it's not actually picking up the application setting. I'll just share the whole screen and just make sure that I have the presentation up. So there we go. It's just actually good because this. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So, so I'm going to be talking about ZED-i, which stands for Zero Peak Energy Building Design for India. So the goal of the project is looking very much at peak energy demand from buildings. Why peak energy demand? Well, as others have noted, India's population is growing at a robust rate, and it's expected to reach about 2.3 billion people by 2080. But at the same time, per capita energy use is growing, even faster, and this is being largely driven by the increasing rates of urbanization. And I think other speakers yesterday and today have remarked on just how rapid that increase is. I think Rajat presented some data on what's happened just over the last 10 years. We've had an order of magnitude increase in demand for cooling, for example, in just about 10 years' time. So this is an absolutely huge challenge. And what that does, of course, is place stress on the energy networks, because if your demand is going to be driven by cooling, it inevitably means that the greatest demand for this cooling occurs at times when the temperatures are the highest outside. So that means you've got to have generating capacity that is able to reactively appear on the grid to meet the rising demand on a daily basis. So obviously that's not great, because if you're firing up coal or gas to kind of manage that peak load, that's not really great in terms of cutting carbon emissions. So that's another problem. And of course, that creates fragility in the network itself. Even now, parts of Delhi, even though things have much improved since I was a child in Delhi, even now, we get significant outages to maybe 3 hours, and some other parts of the country, maybe even 30 hours a month. So it isn't just simply access to energy, it is a quality of energy supply and the stability of the supply, and things like fluctuating voltages and so on that are a huge issue. Now, so the fact is that the growth in demand far outstrips the growth in supply. So even if you have access, you might not actually be able to meet your comfort needs. And this resulting loss in productivity and economic growth, someone has measured to be approximately 5% of India's GDP per annum. So whilst mean demand is increasing, and we've seen that in a lot of the presentations, at the moment, for example, mean demand is only about 13% that of the UK. So per capita, an Indian household is only demanding about 13% of the energy that a typical UK household might be demanding, for example. But peak demand is obviously a huge problem. So we came together as a bunch of universities and institutions. So Bath is the UK lead on the project, and Roorkee, IIT Roorkee, and Rajasekar is here with us on the panel today, is the India lead on the project. And Rajasekar and I had previously collaborated on smaller endeavors, and that's how we were able to build up this relationship. In addition, CBRI, which is the Central Building Research Institute, came in, and they're also based in Roorkee, as did IIT Delhi. So this was a large team that was assembled. I haven't mentioned everybody's name and so on, just in the interest of time, looking at the sort of research questions on the right-hand side. So how much is how much peak and mean demand reduction can you actually achieve using different techniques? To what extent are these actually different problems? What are the technologies that are appropriate given India's climate, society, wealth, materials, and skills? And are there any disbenefits in terms of heat stress and so on, particularly under future climate? So these were sort of the broad motivating research questions. I haven't put together a list of the work packages and so on, because I really would like to jump in to talk about some of the outputs we've got. But I would like to highlight some of the possible attacks on the problem we might have taken. Some of these were addressed and others remain unaddressed as part of our work. But I know some of the other projects that we've already heard from have actually been looking at issues, for example, in the bottom left, issues around control, feedback, and things like that. Rajat just talked about it. Comfort has been a major aspect of work. Rajan talked about it yesterday. And construction, super insulation, thermal mass. David mentioned some of those aspects. And David also mentioned, for example, issues around location and culture, differences in practices and needs. And I think with David's presentation in particular, it was remarkable that even in a community like Oroville, where you've actually got maybe the most committed, seemingly committed environmentalists who initially came in with the attitude that, well, actually, we don't need air conditioning, even if they are moving towards greater demand for air conditioning, that is a very clear sign that this is going to be an extremely widespread phenomenon as incomes rise and as people negotiate new sort of paradigms of comfort. The thing that I want to just talk about today, we did touch on some of these aspects ourselves, and Rajasekar will probably be talking about these as well. But the ones I want to just pick up are looking at weather data, because if you're to design buildings, and we have to remember that something like 50 to 60% of the buildings of the future in India are still to be built. If you're actually going to design buildings to manage for climate, weather, and looking particularly into the future, looking at what the typical weather might be and what an extreme weather situation might look like. Unless we can actually strategically plan for them beforehand, we could be in a situation where either we are where energy demand goes up astronomically and unnecessarily, or that we are designing buildings that are unfit for a changing climate. So this is one of the major attack points that we picked up for this project. The second one was actually the last work package on our project, and it turned into some rather interesting stuff around demand-side management, and I've got some high-level stuff to share with you on that. So just these two for today. Weather files is the first one. So what about weather files? So as many of you know, these are standard inputs in simulators such as Energy Plus. The other speakers have already mentioned Energy Plus as one of the standard simulators, but there are many other dynamic simulation software out there, and weather files are absolutely a core input because the external weather signal defines in a very fundamental way the performance of the building. The problem is that in India, the weather files that exist, which come from ISRE, they cover just 62 locations. But we know from work in the UK, for example, that it's possible that you might have rather large errors in estimates if you don't use localized weather. So something in the range of about 30 kilometers. If your weather file is further away than that, then you're at risk of making a prediction that's really not commensurate with what the building will actually experience. So this is what the picture looks like at the moment in India. And I'm aware of a project, I believe that this is actually being improved by ISRE as we speak. I think it is going to something like a 100-kilometer grid, if I'm not mistaken. But the problem of geographic coverage is only one dimension, because in each of these locations, what you've got is a representation of a typical weather year in the form of a TMY. And in many locations, because we don't have observed data of long enough time series, you're actually looking at data from maybe 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, instead of the required 30 years worth that is mandated in the standards. So in addition to having all these problems of not enough recorded weather data, and even that being only used to represent a typical year, what we absolutely don't have is anything that represents extreme periods, or indeed anything that tells us about what's going to happen in the future. And we've all seen the level of risk that we're exposed to when it comes to a heat wave. India suffered some rather enormous challenges in the summer of 2022, and this is obviously a very global phenomenon. But we've got, as we've seen, we've got communities in India that are particularly vulnerable and particularly at risk, given the levels of income and given the levels of exposure to the external climate. So here's a very concrete example of what this means. On the left here, we've got a topographical picture of Odisha, which is one of the eastern states in India. And somebody on Reddit has produced this, so I thank them for the map. And I just want to pick up these two cities here. So there is a weather file for Bhubaneswar, which is actually on the coast. But if you're putting a building together in Rourkela, which is northwest, and about 300 kilometers away, the weather file for Bhubaneswar might well be your nearest weather file. There are others, but they are of the same sort of order of magnitude, several hundred kilometers away. So the problems are that we've got this requirement for 30 years of continuous hourly synoptic weather data. These data simply don't exist in India. And so much like previous work in the UK, we actually said, well, perhaps we can solve this using synthetic computer-generated weather data. So we worked with the UK Met Office, who gave us a data set from their PRESI product, and that covers all of India at 25-kilometer grid resolution. with weather data going from 1970 all the way to 2100, covering pretty much all the synoptic variables, and over 17 ensembles. So you got 17 different perturbations of the underlying physics model. So there was, you know, a good amount of variability within the data that we got, from which we could construct probabilistic data sets. So without going into the technical details of how the files were produced, because we spent an absolutely enormous amount of time making sure they were fit for purpose, it was a significant challenge, and one I think we didn't quite appreciate when we began the project all those years ago. So what we've got are these 25-kilometer grid resolution weather files, which means that for every 25 kilometers of India's land surface, you can have a bespoke weather file. And not only that, you can have the weather file representing current climate, which is, I think, 1980 to 2010, if I'm not mistaken, and so which we call the 1990s weather file, and then something in the late 2080s. So these are represented in the test reference year format. And following on from previous work in the UK, some of you might be familiar with, these are actually represented in probabilistic terms. At the moment, actually, here we go. So 10th, 50th, and 90th. And this is what we've actually done. So this is a representation of the average summer temperature, which we've taken as March to June. I mean, that's just a sort of norm for 1981 to 2010. And we just marked out Rourkela and Bhubaneswar, which I presented to you in the earlier slide. Wherever you see these little white gaps, those are areas where we are simply not confident the data that we got from PRESI was fit for purpose. So we've actually left those out. And those are usually locations that are over 1,000 meters above mean sea level. So as the elevation increases in PRESI above a certain threshold, we found that we didn't have a huge amount of confidence. So actually, this does leave out parts of Jammu and Kashmir up in the north, and then certain areas in the Western Ghats and on the western side of the Indian coastline. In addition to the test reference years, we developed something called the Indian peak years. And the Indian peak years come in 3 flavors, and they've been set nominally to a 7-day period. So the Indian peak years represent an extreme period of weather, and they are selected by wet bulb temperature. So you get, maybe a monsoonal period or those sorts of times of years when relative humidity is actually quite high, but not necessarily cool enough to carry on. And I think Rajan mentioned this. I think it was Rajan's presentation yesterday that talked about this, or was it Rajat? I can't remember actually, or maybe even both of them talked about this yesterday. And in addition, you get dry bulb extremes, both for hot and cold periods. So you will actually be able to model your buildings for a heat wave-like condition lasting 7 days. We are not precious about the 7 days. You can actually have it for any number of days you want, but we selected 7 days as it's something that's meaningful to people, because people generally understand what a week-length period is, and it's sufficient time to really stress a building out. And the way we have selected those extremes is also quite interesting, because we have not just selected it on the maximum temperature, but also on having high minimum temperatures. So in other words, the buildings aren't allowed to cool down sufficiently at nighttime. I'm not going to present the details of that. The researcher is actually producing those weather files at the moment, and they're going onto the server. But what exists on the server at the moment, actually, you can download these right now, are the 50th percentile test reference years at this resolution. So let me just show you what that looks like for Roorkela and Bhubaneswar. So here are, at the moment, all that exists in this part of the country is that green dot. And you can immediately see that not only is there a huge amount of weather variation, climatic variation between adjacent cells, but also that things are going to look rather different in the future. The temperatures you're seeing are summer average temperatures for these periods. On the left-hand side is 1982 to 2011, and on the right-hand side is the 2080s. So since I've shared my screen, I'm happy to do this. So if you click this link or if you scan that QR code, I'll give you a few minutes if you want to do that. You will end up with this website, which is over here somewhere. This is the Zoom link. Let's turn that off. There we go. So you should end up with this website here, which is zedi.bath.ac.uk. This is the same place where, by the way, we host our UK weather files, which are actually at the 5-kilometer resolution level. So the same website hosts both our UK and India data. All you do is click this Get Started button, choose your country of interest, set the latitude and longitude, which I've cleverly kept a copy of. This is the latitude and longitude for Roorkela. And it asks you a couple of questions, whether you're using it on a real building project or for academic research. So I'm just going to say no here, and I'm just going to say BSO2022 demo. So that's just so that we can keep a track of where these data are being used. So we encourage people to use them because the data are completely free. And apart from that little bit of data collection, you don't have to do anything. So when you do that, you're able to download your data. It explains what the data are and what format and so on. And there's some stuff here about explaining how an EPW file works and so on. And all you do is just click the download data button and you're good to go. And you can actually do this now for every 25 kilometers of India, except for those few white bits that I left out. All right, so returning back to the presentation, the other thing I mentioned was this whole DSM side of what we've been looking at. And this is, we call this building to building load coordination, and it's bio-inspired because it's based out of pictures like this. I walked into a project meeting several years ago and I showed a YouTube video of starling murmurations. And I remarked on the fact that wouldn't it be wonderful if buildings were actually trained to work a bit like these birds, because the birds are rather remarkable. And it's not just birds, it's things like glowworms and other biological groups where individuals actually don't deal with a huge amount of information. So there is no central controller here. There's no one leading bird. And each bird actually just knows information about 6 to 7 neighbors that are topologically the nearest. So they don't have to be geographically the nearest, they're just topologically nearest. And each bird only knows 2 pieces of information about its neighbors: the direction in which the neighbor is traveling and the speed with which it's traveling. And using just that information, the birds are able to form cohesive groups, and I'm sure many of you have seen these before, to coordinate their activities. And actually, we are unsure about what the purpose of this coordination is at the moment. That's how poor our understanding is. But it is believed it is to help with predator-prey relationships, so stopping predators from attacking you, or to forage for food and things like that. But none of that concerns us. What we're more interested in asking is, like the birds, can we share some information between buildings such that instead of everybody doing the same sort of thing, which is what the birds are trying to do, we try and get people to do different sorts of things, which is what we would like to minimize peak demand. So here's a sort of graphical representation. On the top, each circle represents a single home. So we've done this using an agent-based simulation. And this is what you're about to see is an animation from one particular run of this ABM. So the ABM was obviously run many, many times. So we just picked one to illustrate what's going on. And on the bottom, you will see individual dwellings, and the absolute bottom graph, and the one above that is the total load. And on the top right, you can see there's an axis representing the immediate load draw for that home. So you can see here, it's the morning, and then somebody turns on the heating or cooling or whatever. This could be a typical British home, and then boop, and then you get a whole bunch of other things. So these are just nominal loads, not meant to be necessarily terribly realistic at this point, but we investigated many, many, many different scenarios as part of the agent-based model. So this is what a typical load profile might look like, and you can see here it peaks out at about 300 kilowatts. There are, I think, about 100 homes in this particular set. But what happens if you actually connect some of these homes up, i.e. each home knows a little bit about what its neighbors are doing, i.e. the amount of power draw in its local neighborhood. And you can define this local neighborhood in many ways. And we looked at many different types of connections and many numbers of connections. And we found that actually the most optimal connection was just 4 homes. If you have 4 homes sharing information with one another, and they don't have to be co-located, you see. They don't have to be with your immediate neighbor. They could be anywhere within the sort of distribution network, within your local distribution network. So that's what you're seeing here. This is one particular representation and one particular type of connection between neighbors. And we found one of the remarkable results actually is that the results you're about to see are totally agnostic to the nature of the connections between these dwellings. And we looked at many different mathematical ways to define these connections. So here's what actually happens if you connect a bunch of homes up and you let them do their thing. And each home is making autonomous decisions in the presence of very little information about its neighbors. All it knows is what the maximum load draw possible is in its little neighborhood of 4 dwellings, and what each neighbor is drawing at a given moment. And then it takes a decision on whether to draw some loads or not. So the main sort of outcomes from that was that remarkably small number of connections between homes can actually, over the whole network, result in rather large reductions in peak load. And at least, even in the most unfavorable circumstances, it looks like something like 31%, an average 31% reduction is achievable, although you can see there the standard deviation tends to increase quite a lot under these unfavorable situations. So that was really nice. But then we asked the question, what happens if you add heating or cooling loads? Because those are not something, unlike, say, I don't know, a dishwasher or something, that is very much dependent on the external signal. So what we said is, well, actually, what if people were a little bit flexible with when their air conditioning or heating turns on? And with just a 1-hour flexibility in typical schedules, you can actually drive down peak load demand by 44%. I haven't shown data on ramp rates and so on, but even those, we saw some rather dramatic reductions are possible. Something like a 1/3 reduction in ramp rates. A ramp rate, for those of you who don't know, is the speed at which the demand spikes on the network. Obviously, the wider the window of flexibility, the greater the savings are possible. So if you're, instead of turning on your heating at 7 a.m., if you're willing for it to come on at 5 a.m., for example, so a 2-hour flexibility, and a large number of homes were willing to do that on an automated basis, you could save about nearly 2/3 of your peak load demand. So let me just stop that because I've inserted this. Let's insert that back. So we've actually sent this to test in our facility at the Building Research Park in Rowton, which is about an hour's drive away from Bath. And on the bottom right, you can see there are some fascinating structures, which is actually part of a different project to do with healthy housing for refugees. But somewhere dotted along that site are several test buildings that we co-opted for our purpose, including the test cells at the main hive building, which are sort of only have one exposed face, which is in the top right. And in the left-hand side picture, you can see some of the instrumentation we put in there, essentially just a bunch of electrical loads. And what we're still sort of analyzing the data on here, but let me just make that a bit bigger. We found actually that we are able to replicate those results from the ABM in what is a very small network of buildings. So these are only 9 buildings overall in this entire group. And this is in fact just a group of 3 out of those 9 that are operating within a mini neighborhood. So I think those were just the 2 sets of results I wanted to show. I hope that was of interest. And at this point, I know I've consumed quite a lot of time, but I think we're still doing okay for time. I think we can have Rajasekar present some other work from ZED-i. Let me just see what timing is looking like. I should have finished 15 minutes ago. Bloody hell, I've been speaking for a long time. Sorry about that. Rajasekar, do you want to go?
Yeah, thanks, Sukumar. I'm just sharing my screen. Is my screen visible on a screen slideshow mode? Yeah, thanks, Sukumar. Just want to connect the dots, add up to what Sukumar was talking about and a lot of other discussions from the rest of the projects. So we have now interesting weather files, very close resolution for India, a good leap from 60-odd files to about a few thousand weather files. So we are also looking at typical files, we are looking at extreme files, we are looking at future files. So one of the contributions that ZED-i is also doing is providing a kind of method or a framework for thermal stress testing of the building. Ultimately, the intent of ZED-i was to provide an assessment of how stressed your building is and how to minimize that thermal stress. So that is where we are talking about peak loads. So we are in the process of developing a system where we don't have to simulate the building multiple times. Rather, we have a very short run for simulations while we are able to assess the thermal stress in the buildings. Again, as a part of this effort, we have been doing a pan-India survey on 2 different aspects. One is on energy use behavior. Again, we developed a few IoT-based monitoring kits. Just like Dr. Rajat was saying, we had issues with the Wi-Fi or your cellular-based connectivity. So then we went in for localized storage and distribution of data. Then in parallel, we are also, we have also just completed a large-scale subjective assessment of thermal stress in buildings. I'm going to share some insights on that. Thermal stress surveys, we covered slightly over 12,000 samples. As you would see, we have fairly covered climatic conditions in India, except for extremely cold conditions. We did touch Missouri just to see that we are on the colder side of the climates, but mostly it was on the warm, humid, hotter regions. Fairly good distribution we could cover in terms of house type, family situation, gender, plus their socioeconomic classifications. I'm not presenting all the results, but some of these interesting things, just to summarize it. If you look at Indian residences, we found a lot of these houses, people are tolerating temperatures. This is a little alarming signal that I would sense it as, because moment you have a better economic condition, people would prefer to go for air conditioning. This also justifies or kind of reasons out the drastic or exponential increase in the air conditioning load or demand that is happening in India currently. If you see most of the cities, people say, they agree to tolerate a large temperature in their home. Plus, if you also see how their homes are during summer, most of them feel that the house is either warm, hot, or at least slightly warm. If you again connect it back to the thermal comfort adaptation, the surveys that we have been doing in India, you would see that there is a very thin line between, thermal acceptability and preference. So this thin line is eventually merging once the socioeconomic status goes up. So these are few insights. Then we started connecting it with what happens to people and their physiological response. What are they really experiencing in these houses? We are also measuring houses. We are simulating a lot of them. So we are in the process of mapping and kind of establishing what people undergo when the building is thermally stressed. Again, naturally, this corresponds with your heating, cooling, energy demands as well. So we have been iterating a lot of cases with ZED-i. I'm just moving a little fast for time considerations. Plus, there was some mention about the difference between peak and mean energy demand. That was one of the mandates of ZED-i. Are these really two different problems? Yes, we could establish that these were two really different problems. So in a way, we were able to see what, when we optimize a building for peak demand versus what when we are optimizing it for mean demand. Though they are not totally, different directions that we are traveling, but the magnitude of interventions are completely different. So when we have so-called optimized building for mean energy demand using the typical files, weather files that we usually adapt, then the buildings are experiencing almost critical thermal stresses and very high energy demands, which were never predicted when the buildings were conceptualized and designed. So we also moved on with uncertainties because we had a lot of data from people, their requirements, the way they operate their buildings, their appliances. We also are able to now establish what is the kind of demand uncertainty and what are the variables which are really impacting them. Like if you look at AC set point temperature has a very strong binding on the uncertainties which we end up with the building energy demand. Weather files, as we see, have a very clear cut on the uncertainties that we incur in our energy demand prediction. So as a part of this project, we are also tuning HVAC systems. In this case, we have been able to design, fabricate a ground source heat pump system. In this case, we have a 5-ton ground source heat pump system. Now we also have a indigenously developed heat exchanger. So we have kind of fabricated and commissioned it. We are in the process of running the test. This is the second year the tests are running. We are comparing it vis-a-vis best-in-class system available in the market, a standard system. So we have a lab equipped with both these systems where we are measuring both the system as well as the heat pump's coefficient of performance. So we see a fairly good performance, but the mandate of the project is slightly beyond that. It is tuning the system itself in terms of its design as well as operation. Currently, we are in the process of operational tuning. For example, how long is the warming up period or cooling down period? As we all know, ground source heat pump is not for 24 hours operation. So we are looking at how to circumvent these peak conditions. When do we really cool down the system? When do we again operate the system? What is the kind of time frames that we should be looking at? That work is currently happening in our side. Just before I summarize, we are also looking at building envelopes, tuning of building envelopes, specific interest on phase change materials. As you know, it is a dynamic system. So we are looking at some sort of framework to assess what is the right PCM, what is the method to choose a PCM for a building. So instead of saying we are optimizing or developing a new PCM, we are rather providing a broader framework with which we can pick the right phase changing material, including its assessment, its choice, its assessment, as well as its performance testing. So we are in the process of developing and standardizing these procedures as well. So I'll stop it here. Thanks for the time. Thank you, Sukumar.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Rajasekar. I apologize to everybody for consuming so much of the time. But we've had a couple of questions, and I think we have time before the next session starts, so we don't have to be too rushed. We did pad in a bit of time, knowing that we tend to overrun as speakers. So the first question is from Nasuha Salam. She says, what is your opinion on using a synthetic weather generator like the Metronome software or a morphing tool like CC World Weather Gen to study the impact of climate change in other parts of the world. Are these tools providing a good estimate for practitioners to use for studying climate change? I haven't looked at Meteornom for, I think, over 2 decades, actually. I'm conscious that they are providing products. I believe the underlying, the way they generate it at the required temporal resolution is using underlying statistics and then sort of expanding that outward into an hourly resolution. What I've never seen is a piece of work that actually compares output from, say, Meteornom against real weather data, or indeed comparisons against synthetic weather generators of the type we're using. One of the reasons I personally haven't put any effort into this is because I, like Rajat was mentioning, we are deeply passionate about making these tools and data truly openly available. And one of the downsides of things like Meteornom is, of course, that they are commercial. CC World Weather Gen, which is using the morphing method, you know, there's nothing wrong with it. And one of the advantages of using the morphing method, as opposed to the kind of thing we've done, is that the morphing is applied consistently to the same signal. So if you've got, say, a particular representation of June in a given location, and you apply the morphing to it, it's essentially the same signal that's being shifted and shaped. So in that sense, you can make a very consistent comparison between the two series, which is an obvious advantage, because you can, you know, the other sort of uncertainties and the variabilities that come about by using a separate selection method for the future weather file go away. But the reason we've gone in the direction we did is because of this sort of geographic coverage issue that I mentioned, and also being able to pick extreme events. So we wanted to have access to a data set that we could exploit and apply mathematical techniques to actually extract things like an extreme weather event at the desired resolution. That is also consistent because we're producing weather files for both past weather and future weather using the same system. There is that essential comparability. You aren't comparing, say, observed weather data against predicted future weather data. They're all part of the same system, so they are consistent in that sense. So I hope that answers your question, Nasuha. Please feel free to type more in. Henry from South Africa, thank you. Henry from South Africa. Hi, Henry, nice to see you. He says, thank you for your presentation so far. For the first presentation, which I think is for you, David, is how essential is it to explore the possibility to extrapolate methodologies as opposed to extrapolating results?
Yeah, I mean, it's really about what's possible, I suppose. I mean, if you're trying to extrapolate results that's meaningful to the entire country of India, then you're probably going to rely more on top-down methodologies. Even then, very challenging for the size of the country we're talking about and the diversity that we've all been speaking about. But a lot of us, I mean, across these NATARAJAN projects, a lot of us are using bottom-up methodologies. So you need to be aware of how far you can scale that, and you know, even if you have a large number of case studies, to be able to scale up to something that is applicable countrywide is it's impossible, essentially. So what you're really trying to do, and certainly what we were trying to do, is test out a bottom-up methodology on a well-understood case study, show that it works at some level, whatever that means, and then kind of propose that methodology for other areas. So it's not that we necessarily make a choice about whether we're going to extrapolate the methodology or extrapolate the results. You have to base it on what your data set is, what your sample is, and the sort of size. I mean, this is true in the UK as well. I mean, sometimes there's probably examples of modelers over extrapolating results from relatively small samples. In the UK, it just becomes a bit more obvious that you shouldn't be doing that in a country like India, because it's so much bigger, so much more diverse, and so much more complex.
And I guess it's a question of consistency, isn't it? I mean, one of the advantages of developing a methodology is that if the same methodology is applied in other places, firstly, you gain contextuality, which is something we brought up quite a lot over the last day or two. And secondly, because it's consistent. So you can actually then start making comparisons. So it's actually an enabling mechanism rather than worrying at this stage where when you have no data, when you have nothing, then actually methods and consistent, well-tested methods. Rajat talked about this as well. I mean, he's talked about how passionate and motivated they are in terms of releasing the underlying thinking so that other people can replicate. And actually, over time, we're able to build up data sets that we can rely on and understand, isn't it? So Rajat, do you want to come in and say something about this?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. I kind of agree with you. Before these projects came about, one of the challenges in India has been, especially, is sharing of data and the assumptions that people make behind their research projects. So we were observing a lot of data collection happening in a fragmented manner. And I think all the projects that you've kind of heard and seen have attempted to put forward the methods as well as the insights in public domain. And I think that is absolutely essential to encourage the next generation of researchers to engage with it and scale it up. India is a very large country. I don't think 4 projects could even attempt to do a little bit of what we need to do. But I think by putting the methods out, which I think is a common theme across all the projects, whether it's urban energy models or surveys or monitoring or weather generators. I think hopefully some of those can be taken forward by other institutions, going forward. And that would be a very big and nice outcome of the whole program, I think.
Absolutely. Right. Any other questions?
Can I just quickly add to that? For anyone using a model or a tool or a technique within the UK, it is a really useful exercise to transplant that model into another country, because it really opens up your eyes for the kind of hidden assumptions that you had in that modeling technique. Because all of a sudden you realize how much you were relying on certain types of data to inform that model, or what kind of hidden assumptions were in your model around behavior and so household behavior and activity and so on. So it's a useful exercise to transplant your technique from one country to another, and you learn more about that methodology, you develop it more, and it becomes better, essentially.
Excellent. We've just had another question from Shalini. Shalini, I happen to know Shalini. She's Secretary of ICOMOS in India. So her question is, thank you for the wonderful insight into the 4 projects. In the RESIDE project, did the residential data collected also consider the age of buildings, and were these a mix of modern and historic residences?
Yes, Shalini, thank you for the question. Yes, we do have a mix of both modern and old buildings, but we had to kind of balance more towards the modern buildings just because of the underlying electricity infrastructure that they had. You don't want to fiddle with distribution boards in very old homes because of obvious reasons. But yes, we do have some of those, although I would say we deliberately focused on those homes where the electricity infrastructure was more modern, which tend to be more modern homes.
Excellent. Let me just scroll and see. Yeah, there's no other questions so far. I think we've all earned ourselves a well-deserved 7-minute break before the parallel sessions. So with that, I'd just like to thank all the speakers. Thank you, David. Thank you, Rajat. Paul seems to have left us, but thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rajasekar, for taking the time and showcasing our work. I think there's lots to learn from one another and lots to share. I'm really delighted that we managed to put together this platform to showcase the work. And one of the nice things is, with the advantages of putting methods and procedures and algorithms and those sorts of things out, is they are replicable. You can take them to South Africa, you can take them to Peru, you can take them to Ecuador, wherever you wanted, and you will be able to recontextualize them and actually then generate data. So I think we've all contributed heavily to knowledge generation, which is critical to addressing the challenges that were set out in this call document in terms of managing energy demand. Obviously, this was for India, but I actually see this as part of a larger endeavor for other parts of the world. So thank you very much for your time. I think we will stop here with 5 minutes to spare for the parallel sessions. I'm sure people need to leave. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.